Welcome to Sleepy Science Hub. As you settle in tonight, let me know where in the world and at what time you're watching. Perhaps you're resting beneath warm covers in a quiet room, or maybe you're listening through gentle headphones as the evening draws its peaceful curtains around you. Wherever you are, whatever hour finds you here, you've arrived seeking a journey through one of humanity's most fascinating thought experiments. Tonight, we'll explore what would happen if the human lifespan could stretch not just beyond our current century, but across 10 centuries, a full 1,000 years of existence. Now, get comfortable. Adjust your pillow, let your breathing slow, and take a deep, peaceful breath. Let's begin this gentle exploration of time, change, and the extraordinary journey such a life would bring. Imagine, if you will, that you have been granted the gift of a 1,000-year lifespan. The first century of this extraordinary journey would unfold like a slow, gentle river, carrying you through changes both subtle and profound. As you settle into this thought experiment, picture yourself at the beginning of this remarkable adventure, watching as the years flow by like pages in a book that never seems to end, each decade bringing its own quiet transformations and peaceful discoveries. In the early decades of your extended life, the changes would be almost imperceptible, like watching a tree grow or observing the slow erosion of a coastline. Your body, freed from the typical constraints of aging, would settle into patterns that feel both familiar and mysteriously different. The cellular renewal processes that normally slow with age would continue their work with the steady persistence of ocean waves, repairing and replacing worn tissues with the patience of geological time. Your skin, instead of showing the typical signs of aging, might develop a different quality altogether, not the unmarked smoothness of youth, but rather a subtle resilience, like well-cared-for leather that becomes more supple and beautiful with time. The collagen and elastin fibers would maintain their structure through some miraculous biological process, creating a complexion that seems to exist outside of normal time, marked not by wrinkles, but by an almost translucent quality that speaks of deep cellular health and vitality. Your hair would tell its own story across these early decades. Rather than graying or thinning in the conventional patterns, it might cycle through subtle changes, perhaps shifting in texture or developing new patterns of growth that reflect the longer rhythms of your extended biology. Some months it might feel thicker and more lustrous. Other periods it might take on a different wave or curl, as if your follicles were experimenting with new expressions of vitality across the decades. The changes in your eyes would be among the most fascinating aspects of this first century. While typically the lens of the eye becomes less flexible with age, your millennium-long vision might develop entirely new characteristics. You might find that your eyes become more sensitive to subtle variations in light, able to distinguish between shades and tones that escaped your notice in shorter-lived years. Colors might seem richer and more nuanced, as if your visual cortex has had time to develop a more sophisticated palette for interpreting the world. Your hearing, too, would undergo its own mysterious evolution. Instead of the typical high-frequency hearing loss that accompanies conventional aging, your auditory system might become increasingly refined, able to detect subtleties in sound that were previously hidden. You might begin to notice the individual voices in a bird's dawn chorus, or hear the different tonal qualities in rainfall, light spring drizzles versus heavy summer storms versus the crisp percussion of winter precipitation on different surfaces. The most profound changes in this first century would occur in your brain, that magnificent organ that serves as the theater for consciousness itself. With decades upon decades to develop and refine its neural networks, your mind would begin to show capacities that seem almost supernatural compared to typical human cognition. Memory formation would become increasingly sophisticated, not just storing experiences, but creating elaborate associative networks that connect seemingly unrelated events across decades of living. Your capacity for pattern recognition would develop to extraordinary levels. After 50 or 60 years of observing human behavior, weather patterns, economic cycles, and social trends, you would begin to see connections and rhythms that are invisible to those with shorter lifespans. You might notice that certain personality types tend to make specific choices during particular seasons, or that economic markets follow subtle patterns that only become apparent when observed across multiple decades. Language acquisition would become almost effortless as your brain develops increasingly sophisticated systems for processing and retaining linguistic information. By the end of your first century, you might speak a dozen languages fluently, not through intensive study, but through the natural accumulation of exposure and the brain's enhanced capacity for linguistic pattern recognition. Each new language would add layers to your understanding of human thought and culture. Your emotional regulation would undergo remarkable refinement during these early decades. With so much time to observe the ebb and flow of your own emotional responses, you would develop an almost scientific understanding of your inner weather patterns. You might notice that certain thoughts tend to arise during specific seasons, or that particular types of dreams occur in cycles that span several years. This deep familiarity with your own psychological landscape would bring a profound sense of calm and self-acceptance. Creativity would flourish in ways that seem impossible within normal human lifespans. With decades to master multiple artistic mediums, you might become accomplished in painting, music, writing, sculpture, and forms of creative expression that haven't even been invented yet. But more than technical mastery, you would develop a creative perspective that draws from decades of accumulated experience, creating works that reflect the deep time of your existence. Your relationship with learning would transform completely. Rather than the rushed acquisition of knowledge that characterizes normal education, you would have the luxury of deep, contemplative study. You might spend an entire decade studying the behavior of a single species of bird, or devote 20 years to understanding the geological history of your local landscape. This patient, unhurried approach to learning would yield insights that are impossible to achieve in shorter lifespans. Physical fitness would take on entirely new dimensions across this first century. Your body, given unlimited time to adapt and develop, might achieve levels of coordination and capability that seem impossible today, not through superhuman strength or speed, but through the perfect integration of movement that comes from decades of mindful physical practice. Your relationship with your body would become like that of a master craftsperson with their most treasured tool, intimate, respectful, and profoundly skillful. Sleep patterns would likely evolve as well, as your circadian rhythms adapt to the longer timescales of your existence. You might develop cycles that span weeks or months rather than the typical daily patterns, experiencing periods of heightened alertness and activity, followed by longer phases of contemplative rest and restoration. These extended sleep cycles would allow for deeper levels of cellular repair and neural consolidation than are possible in normal human lifespans. Your relationship with seasons and natural cycles would deepen immeasurably. After experiencing 50 winters, you would know cold not just as a temporary discomfort, but as a profound natural force with its own personality and rhythm. Summer would become a friend whose moods and expressions you recognize intimately. The cycles of plant growth, animal migration, and celestial movements would become as familiar as the rhythm of your own breathing. By the end of this first century, you would have become something unprecedented in human experience, a being who combines the wisdom of deep time with the vitality of extended youth. Your perspective would encompass not just personal experience, but a broad understanding of human nature, natural cycles, and the slow rhythms of change that shape the world. Yet this would be only the beginning of your 1,000-year journey, the foundation upon which even greater transformations would build. As you move beyond your first century of extended life and deeper into the second, something profound begins to shift in the very fabric of your consciousness. The wisdom of deep time starts to settle into your being like sediment in a peaceful lake, creating layers of understanding that are impossible to achieve in a conventional human lifespan. This isn't the wisdom of accumulated facts or learned information, but rather something far more fundamental, an intuitive understanding of the rhythms, patterns, and deeper currents that flow beneath the surface of existence. Your perception of time itself undergoes a radical transformation during these decades. Where once a year seemed like a significant period, now decades flow by like seasons once did. You begin to think and plan in cycles that span multiple generations of ordinary human lives. A project that might take 30 years to complete no longer seems daunting, but rather like a pleasant afternoon's work. This expanded temporal perspective brings with it a profound sense of patience and calm that permeates every aspect of your existence. The patterns of human behavior become as readable to you as the weather patterns you've observed for over a century. You begin to see that what individuals experience as unique personal dramas are actually variations on themes that repeat across generations with remarkable consistency. Young people falling in love, middle-aged individuals questioning their life choices, elderly people reflecting on their legacies. These cycles become as predictable and natural as the changing seasons, viewed from your perspective of deep time. Your understanding of relationships evolves in ways that would seem impossible to those living conventional lifespans. Having observed hundreds of friendships form, flourish, and fade, you develop an appreciation for the natural life cycles of human connections. You learn to love people fully while simultaneously accepting the temporary nature of all relationships. This doesn't diminish the depth of your affection, but rather adds a poignant beauty to each connection, like appreciating the brief bloom of a flower because you know it won't last forever. The wisdom of deep time brings with it an almost supernatural ability to see potential futures unfolding from present circumstances. Having witnessed similar patterns play out dozens of times across the decades, you begin to recognize the early signs of major changes in individuals, relationships, communities, and even societies. This isn't prophecy, but rather pattern recognition refined across centuries of careful observation. Your relationship with knowledge transforms completely during this period. Instead of seeking to accumulate information, you begin to focus on understanding the deeper principles that govern how things work. You might spend 20 years studying the mathematics underlying natural patterns, or devote decades to understanding the psychological principles that drive human behavior. This patient, contemplative approach to learning yields insights that are impossible to achieve through rushed study. Language continues to evolve in your mind, but now in ways that transcend mere communication. Having mastered numerous languages over your extended lifetime, you begin to perceive the deeper structures and patterns that underlie all human communication. You start to hear the music in conversation, the rhythmic patterns in prose, the emotional harmonies in poetry. Language becomes not just a tool for sharing information, but a medium for experiencing the aesthetic dimensions of human thought. Your creative expression reaches new levels of sophistication as you draw from over a century of accumulated experience and refined skill. The artworks you create during this period reflect not just technical mastery, but the deep time perspective that infuses all your thinking. A painting might capture not just a moment, but an entire season or even a decade of observations. Music you compose might reflect the slow rhythms of geological time or the patient patterns of forest growth. Memory during this period becomes less about specific recollections and more about distilled essence. Instead of remembering every detail of every conversation, you begin to retain the emotional and intellectual core of experiences while allowing peripheral details to fade gracefully. This natural editing process creates space in your mind for new experiences while preserving the wisdom gained from old ones. Your physical presence begins to carry a quality that others find both compelling and mysterious. Having moved through the world for over a century with mindful awareness, your body language becomes incredibly refined and expressive. Every gesture carries the weight of deep consideration. Every movement reflects the integration of decades of physical practice. People find themselves drawn to your presence without being able to articulate exactly why. The natural world reveals layers of complexity and beauty that become visible only through extended observation. You begin to recognize individual trees as old friends, watching them through multiple decades of growth and seasonal change. The behavior of local wildlife, becomes as familiar as that of close human companions. Weather patterns reveal their deeper personalities, and you can sense the approach of storms or changes in seasons with an accuracy that seems almost mystical. Your understanding of personal growth and change reaches profound depths during this period. Having observed your own psychological evolution across more than a century, you develop an intimate understanding of how personalities develop, how habits form and change, and how consciousness itself evolves over time. This self-knowledge brings a profound sense of compassion, both for yourself and for others who are struggling with challenges you've seen before. The concept of legacy takes on entirely new meaning when viewed from the perspective of deep time. You begin to understand that true legacy isn't about monuments or achievements, but rather about the subtle influences that ripple out through time in ways that are impossible to predict or control. A kind word spoken to a child, a moment of understanding shared with a stranger, a small act of creativity or beauty. These become the true measures of a life's impact. Your relationship with material possessions transforms completely as you gain the perspective of deep time. Having seen fashions, technologies, and trends come and go repeatedly, you develop a natural detachment from the acquisition of things. Instead, you begin to value objects for their intrinsic beauty, their functionality, or their capacity to facilitate meaningful experiences. Your living space becomes a carefully curated collection of items that have proven their worth across decades of use. Philosophical questions that might torment shorter-lived individuals begin to resolve themselves naturally through the wisdom of deep time. Questions about the meaning of life, the nature of happiness, and the purpose of existence are answered not through intellectual analysis, but through the lived experience of observing these themes play out across decades of existence. The answers that emerge are deeply personal, yet somehow universal, rooted in direct experience rather than abstract reasoning. Your capacity for presence, the ability to be fully engaged with the current moment, reaches extraordinary levels during this period. Paradoxically, the vast temporal perspective you've gained makes you more aware of the preciousness of each individual moment. Having seen how quickly decades can pass, you develop an appreciation for the beauty and significance of present experience that brings a quality of mindfulness to everything you do. The political and social movements you've witnessed across your extended lifetime begin to reveal their deeper patterns and rhythms. You see how societies cycle through phases of expansion and contraction, how ideologies rise and fall like seasonal weather patterns, how human progress occurs not in straight lines, but in spirals that revisit similar themes at deeper levels. This understanding brings a profound sense of equanimity regarding social change and political upheaval. By the end of this second century, the wisdom of deep time has fundamentally transformed your relationship with existence itself. You've become a being who thinks in centuries while remaining present to moments, who loves deeply while accepting impermanence, who sees patterns while appreciating uniqueness. This is just the foundation for the even more profound transformations that will unfold as your millennium-long journey continues to deepen and evolve. As you enter your third century of existence, something extraordinary begins to happen to the landscape of your mind. Your memory, that vast library of experiences accumulated over 200 years of living, undergoes a profound transformation that would seem miraculous to those living conventional lifespans. This isn't simply a matter of having more memories stored away. Rather, your entire relationship with remembering and forgetting evolves into something entirely new, a sophisticated system of consciousness that operates according to principles unknown to shorter-lived minds. The sheer volume of experiences you've accumulated by this point would overwhelm any normal human memory system, yet your mind has developed elegant solutions to this challenge. Instead of being burdened by the weight of countless memories, your consciousness begins to organize experiences into layered networks of meaning and association that feel both effortless and profound. Like a master librarian who knows not just where every book is located, but also how each volume relates to every other. Your memory becomes a living system of interconnected understanding. Your brain develops what could be called temporal memory compression, where experiences from similar time periods begin to blend and merge in ways that preserve their emotional and intellectual essence, while allowing specific details to gracefully fade. Decades of winter mornings, for instance, might compress into a single, archetypal experience of winter morningness that captures the essence of cold air, pale light, and quiet stillness without requiring you to remember every individual day. This natural editing process creates space for new experiences while preserving the wisdom accumulated from old ones. The phenomenon of memory layering becomes increasingly sophisticated as you move through this third century. Instead of remembering events as isolated incidents, your mind begins to perceive how current experiences resonate with similar experiences from decades or even centuries past. A conversation with a young person struggling with career choices might simultaneously evoke memories of hundreds of similar conversations, creating a rich tapestry of understanding that informs your response with the wisdom of accumulated experience. Your autobiographical memory begins to reorganize itself around themes and patterns rather than chronological sequence. Instead of remembering your life as a linear progression of events, you begin to perceive it as a collection of recurring motifs, periods of learning and growth, times of challenge and adaptation, seasons of creativity and expression, cycles of connection and solitude. This thematic organization allows you to access relevant experiences quickly while providing insights into the deeper patterns that have shaped your extended existence. The quality of your memories undergoes a remarkable transformation during this period. Where ordinary human memory tends to fade and distort over time, your memories begin to develop a kind of crystalline clarity that preserves not just the facts of events, but their emotional and sensory texture. You can recall the exact quality of light during a sunset you witnessed 50 years ago, or the precise timbre of a loved one's laughter from decades past. Yet this enhanced clarity comes without the burden of being overwhelmed by detail. Your mind naturally focuses on what was most meaningful about each experience. Pattern recognition across your vast store of memories reaches almost supernatural levels during this third century. Having observed human behavior across multiple generations, you begin to see recurring patterns that play out across decades, or even centuries. You notice that certain types of personalities tend to emerge during specific historical periods, or that social movements follow predictable cycles of enthusiasm, implementation, and eventual transformation. This pattern recognition extends to personal relationships as well. You can often predict how new acquaintances will develop based on subtle similarities to people you've known across the centuries. Your memory begins to develop what could be called cross-temporal associations, where experiences separated by decades or centuries become linked through common emotional or thematic content. The joy you felt at mastering a difficult skill in your first century might be linked to similar feelings of accomplishment experienced throughout your extended life, creating a rich network of positive associations that can be accessed whenever you need encouragement or motivation. Similarly, difficult experiences from across the centuries become linked in ways that provide perspective and resilience. The phenomenon of memory inheritance begins to emerge during this period, where certain experiences become so deeply integrated into your consciousness that they feel almost genetic, as if they become part of your fundamental nature rather than simple recollections. These inherited memories often relate to profound insights about life, love, creativity, or the nature of existence itself. They become part of your core identity, informing your responses to new situations with the wisdom of accumulated centuries. Your relationship with forgetting transforms completely as you gain the perspective of deep time. Rather than viewing forgotten experiences as lost, you begin to understand forgetting as a sophisticated curation process that your mind performs automatically. Experiences that no longer serve your growth or understanding are allowed to fade, creating space for new learning and development. This natural forgetting becomes a gift rather than a limitation, preventing your consciousness from becoming cluttered with irrelevant details. The integration of knowledge across your centuries of experience reaches remarkable levels during this period. Information learned in your first century begins to combine with insights gained in your second century, creating new understanding that is greater than the sum of its parts. Scientific principles studied decades ago might suddenly illuminate artistic techniques learned in recent years, or philosophical insights from your early decades might provide new perspective on relationships developed more recently. Your memory develops an almost mystical quality of presence, where past experiences don't feel like distant recollections, but rather like accessible dimensions of current reality. You can step into memories of meaningful conversations or beautiful landscapes with such vividness that they feel almost as real as present experience. This isn't escapism, but rather an expanded sense of temporal presence that allows you to draw wisdom and comfort from the full range of your existence. Dreams during this period become increasingly sophisticated, as your sleeping mind has access to centuries of experiences to weave into nighttime narratives. Your dreams begin to feature characters and scenarios that draw from across your entire extended lifetime, creating nocturnal stories that span decades or centuries. These dreams often provide insights and problem-solving capabilities that draw from the vast database of your accumulated experience. The social dimension of memory becomes particularly fascinating as you encounter people whose grandparents or great-grandparents you knew personally. Your memories become living links to historical periods that others know only through books or stories. You become a walking bridge between past and present, able to provide perspective on how current situations relate to similar challenges faced by previous generations. Your emotional memory develops extraordinary nuance during this third century. Instead of remembering feelings as simple categories like happy or sad, your emotional memory becomes capable of distinguishing between subtle variations in feeling that most people could never articulate. You can remember not just that you felt joy during a particular experience, but the specific quality of that joy, whether it was the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment, the exuberant celebration of success, or the gentle warmth of contentment. Memory becomes increasingly selective and purposeful as you gain the wisdom of deep time. Rather than trying to remember everything, your mind becomes skilled at identifying which experiences are worth preserving in detail and which would be allowed to fade into general impressions. This selective memory isn't a limitation, but rather a sophisticated optimization that allows your consciousness to operate with maximum efficiency and wisdom. The phenomenon of memory resonance begins to emerge, where current experiences spontaneously evoke related memories from across your centuries of existence. Walking through a garden might simultaneously activate memories of all the gardens you've known, creating a rich symphony of association that adds depth and meaning to present experience. This resonance effect means that nothing you experience feels isolated or disconnected. Everything becomes part of an ongoing conversation with your accumulated lifetime of experience. By the end of this third century, your memory has evolved into something that transcends simple storage and retrieval. It has become a living, dynamic system of consciousness that actively participates in creating meaning, understanding, and wisdom. Your mind has become a vast ecology of interconnected experiences, where every memory exists in relationship with every other memory, creating a richness of inner life that approaches the infinite. As you continue your journey through the centuries, perhaps nowhere do the profound implications of your extended existence become more apparent than in the realm of human relationships. Love, friendship, family bonds, and the countless connections that weave through a life take on entirely new dimensions when viewed across the vast landscape of a thousand-year existence. The very nature of what it means to care for another person, to share your life with others, and to navigate the complex dance of human connection transforms in ways both beautiful and poignant. In your early centuries, You would have learned to love with a depth and patience unknown to shorter-lived beings. Having the luxury of truly unlimited time changes the entire dynamic of relationship building. Where others might rush to judgment or feel pressured to quickly determine compatibility, you develop the ability to appreciate people as unfolding stories, understanding that the person someone is today represents only one chapter in their potentially long narrative of growth and change. Your approach to romantic love evolves into something both more profound and more accepting than conventional human experience allows. Having potentially witnessed dozens of great loves across your extended lifetime, you come to understand that each romantic connection serves different purposes and fulfills different needs at different stages of your development. You learn to love completely while simultaneously accepting that people grow and change, that what brings two souls together in one century might naturally lead them apart in another. The concept of marriage and partnership takes on fascinating new dimensions when both individuals have the potential for unlimited lifespans. Traditional vows, "until death do us part," become meaningless, replaced perhaps by commitments to love and support each other through specific phases of growth and development. You might choose to be deeply committed to someone for 50 or 100 years, then gradually transition to a different kind of love and connection as you both continue evolving. Friendships across the centuries develop a richness and complexity that approaches the familial. Having the opportunity to know someone for 200 or 300 years means witnessing their complete transformation multiple times over. You see them through periods of youth and discovery, times of challenge and growth, seasons of triumph and achievement, and cycles of reflection and wisdom. These long friendships become like watching the complete life cycle of forests, seeing the same landscape transform through countless seasons while maintaining its essential character. Your relationships with shorter-lived individuals take on a quality of gentle mentorship and profound appreciation. Like an ancient tree that provides shelter and wisdom to the smaller plants and animals in its ecosystem, you learn to offer guidance and perspective while deeply appreciating the fresh energy and new perspectives that shorter-lived people bring to your existence. These relationships teach you about renewal and change, reminding you of the beauty and intensity that comes with experiencing life for the first time. The challenge of watching loved ones age and die while you remain becomes one of the most profound aspects of your extended existence. Yet over the centuries, you develop an approach to this inevitable loss that transforms grief into something more like gratitude. You learn to see each relationship as a gift with its own natural time frame, appreciating the complete arc of a loved one's life while holding space for the sorrow of their departure. Your grief becomes less about the ending and more about the beauty of what was shared. Family relationships undergo their own unique evolution across your extended lifetime. You might watch your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and dozens of subsequent generations live their complete lives while you continue on. This creates an almost godlike perspective on family lineage, allowing you to see how traits, talents, and characteristics flow through generations like streams of consciousness moving through time. You become the living memory of your family line, the repository of stories and wisdom that spans centuries. Parenting takes on entirely new dimensions when you have unlimited time to observe and guide a child's development. Instead of the rushed 18 or 20 years that conventional parents have, you could potentially guide and support your children through centuries of their own growth and development. This creates relationships of unprecedented depth and mutual evolution, where parent and child grow and learn together across vast spans of time. The social dynamics of communities and societies become fascinating to observe across multiple centuries. You witness how different personality types emerge in response to changing social conditions, how leadership styles evolve to meet new challenges, and how communities develop their own life cycles of birth, growth, maturity, and transformation. Your perspective on social conflict and cooperation becomes deeply informed by having seen similar patterns play out repeatedly across the generations. Your understanding of human nature reaches profound depths through centuries of relationship experience. You begin to see that beneath the surface differences of culture, era, and individual personality, there are fundamental patterns of human behavior that remain constant across time. People's core needs for love, security, meaning, and connection remain unchanged, even as the specific ways these needs are expressed evolve with changing circumstances. Romance and sexuality undergo their own interesting evolution across your extended lifetime. Having the opportunity to explore intimate connection with people across multiple centuries, you develop an understanding of love and desire that encompasses far more than physical attraction or emotional compatibility. You learn to appreciate the different types of intimacy that are possible at different life stages, and how sexual and romantic energy can be expressed and experienced in ways that transcend conventional limitations. The phenomenon of generational friendship becomes increasingly important as you move through the centuries. You begin to develop close relationships with people who represent different generations of the same family lines, watching how certain qualities and characteristics echo through the generations while taking on new expressions. These generational friendships provide unique insights into how human traits evolve and adapt across time. Your role as confidant and advisor naturally develops as people seek out your perspective on their relationships and life challenges. Having observed so many similar situations across the centuries, you become skilled at offering guidance that draws from deep experience while remaining sensitive to the unique aspects of each person's circumstances. People find comfort in sharing their struggles with someone who has the perspective to understand that most challenges are temporary and most pain does have the potential to heal. The development of what could be called relationship wisdom becomes one of the most valuable aspects of your extended existence. You learn to recognize the early signs of different types of relationships, which connections are likely to be brief but intense, which have the potential for long-term growth, which are meant to teach specific lessons, and which are simply meant to be enjoyed for their immediate pleasure. This wisdom allows you to approach each relationship with appropriate expectations and investment. The concept of loyalty and commitment evolves significantly across your extended lifetime. Rather than viewing loyalty as unwavering constancy regardless of circumstances, you develop a more nuanced understanding of faithful love that includes the wisdom to know when holding on serves love and when letting go is the more loving choice. Your commitments become based on mutual growth and benefit rather than obligation or convention. Community building becomes one of your most important skills as you gain the perspective of centuries. Having observed how different types of communities thrive or struggle, you become skilled at creating social structures that support human flourishing across multiple generations. You understand how to build institutions and traditions that can adapt and evolve while maintaining their essential purpose and character. The experience of mentoring others takes on special significance as you accumulate centuries of wisdom about personal development and relationship dynamics. Young people are naturally drawn to seek your guidance, sensing the depth of understanding that comes from extended experience. You learn to offer wisdom in ways that allow others to discover their own truth rather than simply imposing your perspective on their unique journey. By the end of your 4th century, relationships have become your greatest teachers and your most precious treasures. You understand that while individual relationships may have natural endings, the capacity to love and connect with others only deepens and expands with time. Every person who has touched your life has contributed something valuable to your understanding of what it means to be human, and your own capacity to offer love and support to others has grown beyond anything imaginable in a conventional lifespan. As you journey deeper into your extended existence, now well into your 5th century of life, one of the most profound transformations begins to occur in your relationship with purpose, meaning, and the very question of why you exist. The goals and ambitions that might drive a conventional human lifetime begin to seem quaint when viewed against the vast canvas of centuries. Yet paradoxically, this expanded perspective gives birth to purposes so profound and enduring that they could sustain a consciousness for millennia. In your earliest centuries, purpose might have resembled the familiar patterns of human ambition, career achievements, creative projects, personal relationships, and the desire to leave some form of legacy. But as decades flowed into centuries, you would have discovered that conventional purposes have natural life cycles, like flowers that bloom beautifully for a season and then naturally fade to make space for new growth. This realization doesn't bring despair, but rather a profound liberation from the urgent striving that characterizes shorter lives. The evolution of purpose across your extended lifetime follows patterns as natural and inevitable as the changing seasons. In your first century, you might have pursued mastery in various fields, becoming an expert musician, a skilled craftsperson, a knowledgeable scholar, or a successful entrepreneur. Each mastery would bring its own satisfaction and sense of accomplishment, yet also the growing awareness that even the most complete mastery of any single domain represents only a small fraction of what existence has to offer. By your second century, having achieved multiple masteries and accomplished numerous conventional goals, you might have found yourself drawn to purposes that span longer timescales. Perhaps you became interested in preserving knowledge across generations, or in nurturing institutions that could serve humanity for decades or centuries. These longer-term purposes would have brought a different kind of satisfaction, less immediate but more enduring, like planting trees whose shade you would enjoy for centuries to come. As you moved into your third and fourth centuries, purpose would have begun to transcend individual achievement altogether. Having observed the rise and fall of countless human endeavors, having seen how even the most impressive accomplishments eventually fade into history, you would have discovered purposes rooted not in personal legacy, but in service to the ongoing human experiment itself. Your purposes might have evolved to focus on understanding fundamental principles of existence, consciousness, or the nature of reality itself. The question of what to do with unlimited time reveals itself to be one of the most interesting challenges of extended existence. Without the pressure of mortality to create urgency, you develop the luxury of pursuing interests with infinite patience and depth. You might spend an entire century studying the behavior of a single species, or devote decades to mastering the subtleties of a particular art form. This patient approach to learning and development yields insights impossible to achieve within conventional lifespans. Your relationship with creativity undergoes radical transformation as you gain the perspective of centuries. Early in your extended life, creative expression might have been driven by the desire for recognition, self-expression, or the simple joy of making something beautiful. But across centuries of creative work, you begin to understand creativity as a fundamental force of existence itself. Not something you do, but something you participate in. Your creative work becomes less about producing objects or performances and more about engaging with the creative principle that underlies all of existence. The concept of contribution evolves significantly across your extended lifetime. Where shorter-lived humans might focus on leaving behind specific achievements or institutions, you begin to understand that your most important contributions might be the subtle influences you have on the people around you, the wisdom shared in casual conversations, the example of how to live with patience and depth, the presence that reminds others of possibilities they might not have imagined. These invisible contributions ripple out through time in ways that are impossible to track, but profoundly important. Service to future generations takes on new meaning when you consider that you might personally encounter dozens of future generations. Your purposes naturally expand to include considerations of how your actions today might affect people who won't be born for centuries. This long-term perspective naturally leads to purposes focused on sustainability, wisdom preservation, and the creation of systems and institutions that can adapt and evolve across vast timescales. The pursuit of wisdom becomes one of the most enduring purposes of extended existence. Unlike information, which can be accumulated relatively quickly, wisdom requires the integration of knowledge with experience across extended periods of time. Having centuries to observe the patterns of existence, to see how principles play out across multiple generations, and to test understanding against the reality of lived experience, you develop insights that approach the timeless truths that have guided human understanding across millennia. Your role as a bridge between past and future becomes increasingly important as you accumulate centuries of experience. You become a living link between historical periods, able to carry forward the wisdom of past generations while adapting it to meet the needs of future ones. This bridging function represents a unique form of service that only becomes possible with extended longevity, serving as a custodian of human knowledge and wisdom across the centuries. The development of what could be called meta-purposes begins to emerge as you gain the perspective of deep time. These are purposes that transcend specific activities or achievements and instead focus on fundamental questions about the nature of existence itself. You might find yourself drawn to understanding the purpose of consciousness, the meaning of beauty, the nature of love, or the role of suffering in the human experience. These meta-purposes can sustain investigation and exploration across multiple centuries. Teaching and mentorship naturally become central purposes as you accumulate wisdom that could benefit others. But the teaching that emerges from centuries of experience is quite different from conventional education. Rather than imparting specific knowledge or skills, you find yourself helping others discover their own capacity for wisdom, patience, and deep understanding. Your teaching becomes less about what to think and more about how to think, feel, and exist with depth and authenticity. The preservation and transmission of beauty becomes another enduring purpose that can sustain interest across centuries. Having observed how particular forms of beauty arise, flourish, and sometimes disappear, you might find yourself drawn to ensuring that the most profound expressions of human creativity are preserved and shared across generations. This might involve not just maintaining existing works of art or literature, but also cultivating the conditions that allow new forms of beauty to emerge. Your purposes begin to operate on multiple timescales simultaneously as you gain the perspective of extended existence. You might have immediate purposes that can be accomplished within years or decades, medium-term purposes that span centuries, and ultimate purposes that might require millennia to fully realize. This multi-layered approach to purpose creates a rich texture of meaning that sustains engagement across vast timescales while providing satisfaction and accomplishment along the way. The integration of contemplative and active purposes becomes increasingly sophisticated across your extended lifetime. You learn to balance periods of deep reflection and understanding with phases of active engagement and contribution. This rhythm of contemplation and action allows for the development of wisdom through reflection while ensuring that insights are tested and refined through practical application. Environmental stewardship naturally becomes a central purpose when you consider that you might personally experience centuries of environmental change. Having the opportunity to observe long-term ecological cycles and the impacts of human activity across extended periods, you develop both the knowledge and the motivation to work for the long-term health of the planet. This environmental purpose operates on timescales that match your own longevity, creating natural alignment between personal and planetary well-being. The exploration of consciousness itself becomes one of the most fascinating purposes available to extended longevity. Having centuries to observe your own mental processes, to experiment with different states of awareness, and to study the nature of consciousness through direct experience, you become uniquely qualified to contribute to humanity's understanding of the mind and its possibilities. This exploration might reveal capacities and potentials that are impossible to discover within conventional lifespans. By the end of your 5th century, purpose has evolved from the urgent striving of shorter lives into something more like a gentle current that carries you forward through the centuries. Your purposes have become less about personal achievement and more about participation in a larger unfolding of existence itself. You understand that meaning doesn't need to be grasped or accomplished, but rather discovered and participated in, moment by moment, across the vast landscape of an extended life. As you continue through your remarkable 1,000-year existence, now entering your 6th century of life, the story of your physical form becomes one of the most fascinating aspects of your extended journey. Your body, that faithful companion that has carried your consciousness through 5 centuries of experience, has undergone transformations that would seem impossible to those living conventional lifespans. This isn't the story of a body that has simply avoided aging, but rather of a physical form that has evolved and adapted in response to the unique demands and opportunities of extended existence. The most immediately apparent change in your physical being would be the development of what could be called adaptive resilience, a quality that goes far beyond simple health or fitness. Having had centuries to observe and refine your relationship with your body, you would have developed an intuitive understanding of physical harmony that allows you to maintain optimal function across vast timescales. Your body becomes like a musical instrument that has been played by a master musician for centuries, developing a responsiveness and refinement that can only come through extended, mindful use. Your skin, perhaps the most visible aspect of your physical transformation, would have evolved into something quite extraordinary. Rather than showing the typical signs of aging, it might develop qualities that reflect the deep time of your existence, perhaps a subtle luminescence that seems to come from within, or a texture that suggests both strength and softness, like well-aged silk or perfectly cured leather. The cellular regeneration processes that normally slow with age would have adapted to the extended timescale of your existence, creating skin that renews itself with the patience and precision of geological processes. Your musculature would undergo fascinating adaptations across the centuries. Having had unlimited time to explore different forms of movement and physical expression, your body would develop a kind of integrated strength that encompasses not just power, but also flexibility, coordination, and endurance. Your muscles would learn to work together with an efficiency that reflects centuries of mindful movement, creating a physical presence that seems to flow rather than simply move through space. The cardiovascular system would adapt in remarkable ways to support centuries of existence. Your heart, having beaten faithfully for hundreds of years, would develop an efficiency and rhythm that reflects the slower tempo of extended life. Rather than the rapid, sometimes irregular patterns of shorter lifespans, your cardiovascular system might settle into deeper, more sustainable rhythms that mirror the extended cycles of your existence. Blood flow would become optimized for the long-term nourishment of tissues that must maintain their function across centuries. Your respiratory system would evolve to support the contemplative depth that characterizes extended existence. Breathing would become less about the urgent exchange of gases and more about the rhythmic connection with the atmosphere around you. Having had centuries to explore different breathing patterns and their effects on consciousness, you would naturally develop respiratory habits that support both physical health and mental clarity across extended periods of time. The skeletal system would undergo particularly interesting adaptations to support centuries of existence. Bones that must maintain their strength and flexibility across such extended periods would develop density and structure patterns that are unknown in conventional human physiology. The constant renewal of bone tissue would adapt to much longer cycles, creating skeletal strength that improves rather than deteriorates over time. Your posture and movement would reflect this enhanced skeletal support, creating a bearing that seems both grounded and graceful. Your nervous system would become perhaps the most remarkably adapted aspect of your physical being. Having had centuries to refine neural pathways and develop new connections, your nervous system would achieve levels of integration and efficiency that approach the mystical. Reaction times, sensory processing, and motor control would all benefit from the extended time available for neural optimization. Your nervous system would become like a perfectly tuned orchestra, with each component working in seamless harmony with all others. Sensory adaptation would create abilities that seem almost supernatural compared to conventional human perception. Your eyes, having observed the world for centuries, would develop the ability to see subtle differences in light, color, and movement that escape ordinary vision. Your hearing would become attuned to frequencies and patterns that are normally below the threshold of human perception. Touch, taste, and smell would all develop extraordinary sensitivity and discrimination, allowing you to perceive aspects of the physical world that are invisible to shorter-lived beings. The endocrine system would adapt to support the unique demands of extended existence. Hormone production would settle into cycles that span much longer periods than conventional human rhythms, supporting the slower metabolism and more sustainable energy patterns that characterize extended life. Growth hormones, stress hormones, and reproductive hormones would all find new patterns of expression that support health and vitality across centuries rather than decades. Your immune system would become incredibly sophisticated after centuries of encountering and adapting to various challenges. Having had extended time to develop and refine immune responses, your body would achieve a level of disease resistance that goes far beyond conventional human capabilities. But this wouldn't be simple immunity. It would be more like immune wisdom, with your body's defense systems becoming capable of responding to new challenges with the accumulated knowledge of centuries of previous encounters. The digestive system would adapt to the contemplative pace of extended existence. Rather than the urgent processing of nutrients required for rapid growth and intense activity, your digestive system would develop patterns that support the steady, sustainable nourishment needed for extended longevity. You might find that your nutritional needs change significantly across the centuries, with your body becoming capable of extracting maximum benefit from smaller amounts of carefully chosen foods. Temperature regulation would become increasingly sophisticated across your extended lifetime. Having experienced hundreds of seasonal cycles and thousands of different environmental conditions, your body would develop extraordinary ability to maintain optimal internal conditions regardless of external circumstances. This thermoregulation would become so refined that you might be comfortable in temperature ranges that would challenge ordinary humans. Sleep patterns would evolve to support the unique rhythms of extended existence. Rather than the daily sleep cycles of conventional humans, you might develop rest patterns that span weeks or months, with periods of extended wakefulness followed by deeper, more restorative sleep phases. These extended sleep cycles would allow for levels of cellular repair and neural consolidation that are impossible within conventional human lifespans. Your relationship with physical pain and discomfort would transform significantly across the centuries. Having had extended time to understand the messages that pain carries about the body's needs and conditions, you would develop sophisticated approaches to physical discomfort that emphasize healing and adaptation rather than simple pain avoidance. Pain would become a teacher rather than an enemy, providing information that helps maintain optimal physical function across extended periods. The integration of mind and body would reach extraordinary levels across your extended lifetime. Having had centuries to explore the connections between mental states and physical conditions, you would develop conscious control over bodily functions that are normally automatic. Heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, and even immune function might become partially subject to conscious direction, creating a level of mind-body integration that approaches the legendary abilities of advanced meditators. Physical creativity would develop in remarkable ways across your extended existence. Having had unlimited time to explore different forms of movement, dance, martial arts, and physical expression, your body would become capable of movements and gestures that seem to transcend ordinary human limitations. This wouldn't be superhuman strength or speed, but rather a quality of movement that reflects centuries of refinement and integration. Your relationship with the physical environment would become increasingly intimate across the centuries. Having had extended time to observe and adapt to natural cycles, seasonal changes, and environmental rhythms, your body would develop sensitivity to environmental conditions that approaches the intuitive awareness of wild animals. You might become capable of sensing approaching weather changes, seasonal transitions, or even geological activities through subtle physical cues. The phenomenon of cellular wisdom would emerge across your extended lifetime. Individual cells throughout your body would seem to develop their own form of memory and intelligence, learned through centuries of experience and adaptation. This cellular wisdom would contribute to overall health and vitality in ways that transcend conventional understanding of human physiology. By the end of your 6th century, your body would have become something unprecedented in human experience, a physical form that embodies the wisdom and adaptation of deep time while maintaining the vitality and responsiveness needed for continued existence. Your physical being would serve not just as a vessel for consciousness, but as an active participant in the ongoing exploration of what it means to exist across vast stretches of time. As you move deeper into your extraordinary millennium of existence, now approaching your 7th century of life, you begin to experience one of the most remarkable aspects of extended longevity, the opportunity to witness the slow, majestic transformation of the world itself. Like a patient observer stationed at a perfect vantage point, you watch as human civilization, technology, culture, and a natural world undergo changes that span timescales invisible to shorter-lived beings. This perspective grants you insights into the nature of change itself, revealing patterns and rhythms that can only be perceived across centuries of careful observation. Your earliest decades of extended life would have seemed filled with rapid change, as technologies and social movements that appeared revolutionary transformed society within years or decades. But as you accumulate centuries of perspective, you begin to see that what once seemed like sudden shifts are actually part of much longer cycles and patterns. You develop the ability to perceive the underlying currents that drive change, understanding how innovations emerge from long periods of gradual development and how social transformations follow predictable rhythms of expansion, integration, and eventual evolution into new forms. Technology becomes one of your most fascinating subjects of long-term observation. Having witnessed the complete life cycle of countless innovations, from their first tentative emergence through their period of rapid adoption to their eventual replacement by newer developments, you gain unique insights into the patterns of technological evolution. You see how each generation of technology builds upon previous innovations while simultaneously making them obsolete, creating waves of change that follow natural rhythms of birth, growth, maturity, and transformation. The development of communication technologies would be particularly striking to observe across centuries. You might witness the evolution from simple mechanical devices to complex electronic systems to technologies that integrate directly with human consciousness in ways that would seem magical to earlier generations. But more interesting than the technologies themselves would be observing how each advancement changes the nature of human connection and community, creating new possibilities for relationship, while sometimes making older forms of intimacy seem quaint or obsolete. Transportation would undergo equally remarkable transformations across your extended observation period. You might witness the progression from animal-powered vehicles to mechanical transportation to systems that transcend current understanding of movement and space. Each advancement would not only change how people travel, but would fundamentally alter human relationships with distance, place, and the concept of home itself. The evolution of cities and settlements would provide another fascinating perspective on long-term change. Having the opportunity to watch particular locations transform across centuries, you would observe how communities adapt to changing technologies, populations, and environmental conditions. You might see modest villages grow into great cities, watch urban centers rise and decline, and observe how the physical organization of human habitation reflects deeper changes in values, technology, and social organization. Environmental change would be one of the most profound aspects of your long-term observation. Having the perspective to witness multiple centuries of climate patterns, you would understand weather and environmental systems in ways that are impossible within conventional lifespans. You might observe complete forest cycles, watch coastlines reshape themselves, and witness how ecosystems adapt to changing conditions across timescales that dwarf human planning horizons. The transformation of human knowledge and understanding would be equally remarkable to observe. You would witness the rise and fall of entire scientific paradigms. Watch as theories that seem definitive in one century are replaced by completely different understanding in the next. You might observe how human knowledge builds upon itself in ways that are both continuous and discontinuous, with periods of gradual accumulation followed by sudden leaps that transform everything. Social and political movements would reveal their deeper patterns when observed across centuries. You would see how ideologies emerge, gain influence, achieve partial implementation, and then evolve into new forms that might be unrecognizable to their original proponents. The cycles of social progress would become visible, periods of expansion followed by consolidation, times of innovation followed by integration, phases of revolution followed by stability. Cultural evolution would provide endless fascination across your extended observation period. You might witness the complete life cycle of artistic movements, watch as new forms of creative expression emerge and flourish, and observe how cultural values shift in response to changing conditions. Music, literature, visual arts, and forms of creative expression that haven't been invented yet would all undergo transformations that follow natural patterns of exploration, development, and eventual transcendence. The evolution of human relationships and social structures will be particularly interesting to observe across centuries. You might witness how concepts of family, partnership, community, and social responsibility adapt to changing conditions while maintaining their essential functions. The forms that human connection takes might change dramatically, but the underlying needs for love, security, meaning, and belonging would remain constant. Educational systems would undergo remarkable transformations as human knowledge and capabilities expand across the centuries. You might observe the evolution from simple information transfer to sophisticated development of human potential, watching as educational approaches adapt to serve beings with increasingly expanded lifespans and capabilities. The very concept of what it means to learn and grow would evolve as the timescales for human development extend far beyond current understanding. Language would provide another fascinating subject for long-term observation. You might witness the birth of entirely new forms of communication. Watch as human language adapts to incorporate new technologies and expand to express concepts that don't currently exist. The evolution of how humans communicate with each other and with other forms of intelligence would reveal patterns that are invisible within conventional lifespans. Economic systems would undergo transformations that reveal the deeper principles underlying human cooperation and resource allocation. You might observe how different approaches to economics emerge, flourish, and eventually evolve into new forms as human needs and capabilities change. The relationship between work, value, and meaning would transform in ways that reflect the expanded possibilities of extended existence. Spiritual and philosophical traditions would evolve in response to the expanded understanding that comes with extended lifespans and advancing knowledge. You might witness the emergence of new approaches to meaning, purpose, and transcendence that are specifically adapted to beings who have centuries to explore the deepest questions of existence. Traditional wisdom would be integrated with new insights in ways that create entirely new understanding. The relationship between humanity and other forms of intelligence, whether artificial, extraterrestrial, or emerging from evolutionary processes, will be fascinating to observe across centuries. You might witness first contact with forms of consciousness that are currently beyond human imagination, observing how such encounters transform human understanding of intelligence, consciousness, and identity itself. Scientific understanding would undergo revolutions that make current knowledge seem as primitive as ancient mythology. You might observe the development of technologies and understanding that allow humanity to manipulate matter, energy, space, and time in ways that seem magical from current perspectives. Each breakthrough would build upon previous knowledge while simultaneously revealing how limited that previous understanding actually was. The very concept of what it means to be human would evolve across your extended observation period. You might witness the emergence of human capabilities that transcend current limitations. Observe the integration of technology with biology in ways that blur traditional boundaries, and watch as consciousness itself expands to encompass possibilities that are currently unimaginable. By the end of your 7th century, your perspective on change would have evolved from seeing it as a series of discrete events to understanding it as a continuous flow of transformation that follows natural rhythms and patterns. You would understand that what appears to be chaos and confusion from a short-term perspective actually represents the natural process of evolution and growth when viewed from the timescale of centuries. This understanding would bring a profound sense of peace and confidence in the ongoing unfolding of existence itself. As you enter your 8th century of existence, something profound shifts in your awareness. You begin to perceive and attune yourself to the deep rhythms of Earth itself. Having observed the planet for centuries, you develop a sensitivity to patterns and cycles that operate on timescales so vast that they are invisible to shorter-lived beings. Like learning to hear the subtle harmonies in a complex piece of music, you begin to detect the underlying rhythms that govern not just human civilization, but the living planet that sustains all life. Your relationship with seasonal cycles undergoes a remarkable transformation during this period. Where once you might have experienced summer and winter as pleasant or challenging periods lasting a few months, you now perceive seasons as movements in a much grander symphony. Having witnessed hundreds of seasonal cycles, you begin to notice subtle variations and patterns that repeat across decades and centuries. You might observe that certain types of winters tend to follow particular patterns of solar activity, or that the character of spring varies in predictable ways that correlate with larger climatic cycles. The phenomenon of ecological memory becomes increasingly apparent to you during this 8th century. You begin to notice how forests, rivers, and landscapes carry information about past events in ways that become visible only through extended observation. A forest that was clear-cut 2 centuries ago might still show subtle traces of that disturbance in the patterns of tree growth and species distribution. Rivers might reveal their ancient courses through vegetation patterns that persist long after the water has changed its path. Weather patterns reveal their deeper structure when observed across centuries of careful attention. What meteorologists call 100-year storms become familiar recurring events in your experience, allowing you to understand the natural rhythms of extreme weather that are invisible to conventional human timescales. You begin to perceive how atmospheric systems follow patterns that span decades or centuries, creating cycles of drought and abundance, storm and calm, that govern the long-term health of ecosystems. Your awareness of geological processes develops to an almost mystical level during this period. Having had centuries to observe the subtle signs of geological activity, you become sensitive to changes in the earth that precede earthquakes, volcanic activity, or other geological events by months or years. The very ground beneath your feet begins to feel alive and dynamic, constantly shifting and adjusting in response to forces that operate on timescales measured in millennia. The migration patterns of animals take on new significance when observed across centuries. You begin to see how species adapt their movements in response to long-term climate changes, observing shifts in migration routes and timing that reflect the planet's adaptation to changing conditions. Birds might gradually adjust their seasonal movements across decades, following resources and climate patterns in ways that demonstrate the remarkable adaptive intelligence of natural systems. Ocean currents and their influence on global climate become personally familiar during your 8th century of observation. Having witnessed multiple cycles of ocean circulation changes, you understand how the vast rivers of water that flow through the world's oceans create patterns of warmth and cold, abundance and scarcity, that influence weather patterns across the entire planet. The oceans reveal themselves to be the planet's great memory system, storing and redistributing energy across timescales that dwarf human civilization. Forest succession becomes one of your most intimate areas of understanding during this period. Having watched particular forests through complete cycles of growth, maturity, decline, and renewal, you develop an appreciation for the wisdom inherent in natural systems. You see how forests manage their own renewal through cycles of disturbance and recovery, how they adapt to changing conditions while maintaining their essential functions, and how they serve as repositories of both carbon and memory for the planet. The carbon cycle, that fundamental process that links all life on Earth, becomes visible to you in ways that are impossible within conventional human timescales. You observe how carbon moves through the atmosphere, oceans, forests, and geological systems in patterns that span centuries and millennia. This perspective allows you to understand climate change not as a sudden crisis, but as part of the planet's natural tendency to seek new equilibrium states in response to changing conditions. Your relationship with astronomical cycles deepens significantly during this 8th century. Having observed multiple solar cycles, variations in Earth's orbit, and the subtle influences of lunar and planetary movements, you begin to perceive how cosmic rhythms influence terrestrial patterns. The 11-year solar cycle becomes as familiar as seasonal changes once were, and you notice how variations in solar activity correlate with weather patterns, biological cycles, and even human behavior. Plant communities reveal their sophisticated communication and cooperation systems when observed across extended periods. You begin to notice how trees in a forest coordinate their responses to threats and opportunities, how they share resources through underground fungal networks, and how they collectively manage the forest ecosystem for long-term stability. The apparent competition between plants is revealed to be part of a larger cooperative strategy that benefits the entire community. Soil development becomes a fascinating subject of observation during this period. Having watched how soil forms and evolves across centuries, you understand the incredible complexity and importance of this living system that supports all terrestrial life. You see how soil organisms create the conditions for plant growth, how they cycle nutrients and store carbon, and how healthy soil systems contribute to the stability of entire ecosystems. Water cycles, from the smallest local watershed to the global circulation of moisture through the atmosphere, become intimately familiar during your 8th century. You observe how water moves through landscapes, how it shapes the land and is shaped by it, and how changes in vegetation, climate, and human activity influence the availability and quality of this most essential resource. The rhythms of extinction and speciation become apparent when life is observed across centuries. You witness how species adapt to changing conditions, how new species emerge to fill ecological niches, and how the web of life continuously reorganizes itself in response to environmental pressures. This perspective reveals evolution not as a distant historical process, but as an ongoing creative force that operates on timescales just slightly longer than your extended lifetime. Mineral cycles, the slow movement of elements through geological and biological systems, become visible when observed across centuries of careful attention. You see how essential minerals move from rocks to soil, to plants to animals, and back again, creating the material foundation that supports all life. This perspective reveals the deep interconnection between geological and biological processes. The planet's magnetic field and its variations across decades and centuries become familiar phenomena during this period. Having observed multiple cycles of magnetic variation, you understand how this invisible shield that protects life from cosmic radiation fluctuates in response to processes deep within the Earth's core. You might even develop sensitivity to changes in magnetic field strength that correlate with various biological and atmospheric phenomena. Climate stability reveals itself to be a dynamic process rather than a static condition when observed across centuries. You see how the planet's climate system continuously adjusts to maintain conditions suitable for life, responding to changes in solar output, atmospheric composition, ocean circulation, and geological activity through complex feedback mechanisms that operate across multiple timescales. Your perception of time itself becomes synchronized with these deep planetary rhythms during your 8th century. Instead of thinking in terms of human schedules and deadlines, you begin to move in harmony with the slower rhythms of natural systems. Your activities and decisions begin to reflect this deeper temporal perspective, operating on timescales that honor both immediate needs and long-term planetary health. The concept of planetary health becomes central to your understanding during this period. Having observed the Earth systems for centuries, you develop an intuitive sense of when the planet is thriving and when it is under stress. You learn to read the signs of planetary well-being in the health of forests, the clarity of water, the stability of weather patterns, and the abundance of wildlife. By the end of your 8th century, you have become something like a planetary elder, deeply attuned to the rhythms and patterns that govern the living Earth. Your consciousness has expanded to encompass not just human experience, but the larger story of life itself, creating a sense of belonging and responsibility that spans geological timescales. You understand yourself not just as an individual, but as a conscious participant in the planet's ongoing evolution and development. As you approach your 9th century of existence, one of the most profound and beautiful transformations begins to unfold within your consciousness: the gradual mastery of what could be called the art of letting go. Having accumulated 8 centuries of experiences, relationships, achievements, and attachments, you begin to understand that the secret to navigating such an extended existence lies not in holding tightly to what you've gained, but in learning to release each experience with grace and gratitude when its time has naturally passed. This art of letting go isn't born from loss or disappointment, but rather from the deep wisdom that comes from observing the natural cycles of attachment and release that govern all existence. Like watching the seasons change hundreds of times, you begin to see that everything in life follows patterns of arrival, flourishing, completion, and departure. Understanding these patterns doesn't diminish the beauty or value of what comes into your life, but rather adds a poignant appreciation that comes from knowing that nothing lasts forever, and that this impermanence is what makes each moment precious. Your relationship with material possessions undergoes a profound transformation during this 9th century. Having accumulated and released countless objects across the centuries, you develop a natural detachment from the acquisition of things. You learn to appreciate beautiful objects while they're in your care, without feeling the need to possess them permanently. A piece of art might grace your home for decades before you feel ready to pass it on to someone who will appreciate it in a different way. This practice of conscious stewardship rather than permanent ownership brings a lightness and freedom that enhances rather than diminishes your enjoyment of beautiful things. The letting go of roles and identities becomes one of the most liberating aspects of this period. Having played countless roles across the centuries, student, teacher, creator, leader, follower, innovator, conservator, you begin to understand that these roles are temporary costumes that consciousness wears rather than permanent aspects of who you are. You learn to step into roles fully and authentically while remaining aware that each role has its natural lifespan and will eventually be completed, making space for new expressions of your evolving identity. Relationships, perhaps the most challenging area for practicing the art of letting go, become opportunities for expressing unconditional love precisely because you understand their temporary nature. Having loved deeply and lost many times across the centuries, you develop the capacity to love completely while simultaneously accepting that every relationship has its own natural arc. This doesn't make you love less deeply, but rather more purely, appreciating each person for who they are in the present moment rather than trying to hold them in forms that serve your attachment but may not serve their growth. The release of old versions of yourself becomes a continuous and beautiful practice during this period. You learn to honor and appreciate the person you were in previous centuries while allowing that identity to transform and evolve. The passionate young idealist of your 1st century, the serious scholar of your 3rd century, the wise counselor of your 5th century. Each of these aspects of yourself is appreciated and then gently released to make space for new expressions of your continuing development. Achievements and accomplishments, which might once have defined your sense of worth and identity, become beautiful memories that you hold lightly rather than monuments to which you cling. Having created many things across the centuries and watched them flourish, evolve, and eventually be superseded by newer creations, you develop the ability to invest fully in your work while remaining unattached to its permanence. This detachment paradoxically allows you to create more freely and authentically, since you're not burdened by the need for your creations to be permanent or to define your legacy. The letting go of certainties and fixed beliefs becomes one of the most intellectually liberating aspects of this ninth century. Having seen countless theories, ideologies, and worldviews rise and fall across the centuries, you develop a healthy skepticism about any belief system that claims permanent truth. Instead, you learn to hold beliefs lightly, appreciating them for their utility and beauty while remaining open to new understanding that might require releasing old concepts. This intellectual flexibility allows you to continue learning and growing even after centuries of accumulated knowledge. Grief itself transforms during this period from something to be endured into something to be honored and released. Having experienced many forms of loss across the centuries, you understand that grief is love's tribute to what has been lost, and that honoring grief fully while not allowing it to become permanent residence is one of the most important skills for navigating extended existence. You learn to grieve completely and then let the grief itself go when its work is finished, making space for new love and new joy. The release of control over outcomes becomes a profound source of peace during this ninth century. Having witnessed how rarely even the most careful plans unfold exactly as intended, and having seen how often unexpected developments lead to better outcomes than originally imagined, you develop a deep trust in the unfolding of existence itself. You learn to plant seeds and tend gardens while remaining unattached to specific harvests, finding satisfaction in the planting and tending itself rather than only in the results. Memories, that vast collection of experiences accumulated across 8 centuries, are held with increasing lightness during this period. Instead of clinging to memories as possessions to be hoarded, you learn to appreciate them as visitors that come and go naturally. Some memories will stay vivid and accessible, while others will fade into general impressions, and this natural editing process is welcomed rather than mourned. You understand that remembering everything would be a burden rather than a gift, and that the mind's natural tendency to preserve what's important while allowing other details to fade is a form of wisdom. The letting go of the need to be understood by others becomes particularly liberating during this period. Having accumulated wisdom and perspectives that span centuries, you understand that much of what you've learned cannot be easily communicated to those with shorter lifespans or different experiences. Rather than feeling frustrated by this communication gap, you learn to share what can be shared while accepting that some insights must remain private treasures, appreciated in solitude. Physical capabilities and youthful attributes are released with grace as your body continues its own evolutionary journey across the centuries. Instead of mourning the loss of specific physical abilities, you learn to appreciate your body's adaptation to the requirements of extended existence. Each change in physical capability is viewed as a natural evolution rather than a loss, creating space for new forms of embodied experience and expression. The practice of energetic letting go becomes increasingly sophisticated during this period. You learn to release not just physical objects and relationships, but also emotional states, mental patterns, and spiritual attachments that no longer serve your development. This energetic housekeeping becomes a regular practice, like cleaning and organizing your living space, but applied to the interior landscape of consciousness itself. Expectations about how life should unfold are gently released in favor of curiosity about how life will unfold. Having seen how consistently life surprises even the most experienced observers, you develop a preference for remaining open to possibilities rather than attached to specific outcomes. This shift from expectation to curiosity transforms challenges from disappointments into interesting puzzles and opportunities for growth. The letting go of the need to have answers becomes one of the most spiritually liberating aspects of this ninth century. Having accumulated vast knowledge and understanding across 8 centuries of existence, you simultaneously become more comfortable with mystery and uncertainty. You learn to appreciate questions without immediately needing answers, finding beauty in the unknown and satisfaction in the ongoing exploration of existence's mysteries. Seasonal and cyclical releasing becomes a natural rhythm during this period. Just as nature releases the abundance of summer to make space for the dormancy of winter, you learn to release the accumulations of active periods to make space for contemplative phases. This rhythmic releasing prevents your consciousness from becoming cluttered and creates space for new experiences and insights to emerge. By the end of your ninth century, the art of letting go has become as natural and graceful as breathing. You understand that attachment and release are both natural phases of existence, and that mastering this rhythm allows you to love more deeply, create more freely, and exist more peacefully. The practice of letting go has paradoxically allowed you to hold everything more lightly while appreciating it more fully, creating a quality of presence and appreciation that enhances every aspect of your extended existence. As you approach the completion of your first millennium of existence, you find yourself in a position to contemplate something that no human being has ever before experienced, the true meaning and implications of what appears to be forever. Having lived through 10 centuries of growth, change, love, loss, discovery, and transformation, you possess a perspective on existence that transcends not only individual human experience, but the collective experience of entire civilizations. From this unique vantage point, the nature of forever reveals itself not as a burden or a curse, but as an extraordinary gift that illuminates truths about existence that could never be discovered within the constraints of a conventional lifespan. The first and perhaps most profound realization that emerges from your millennium of existence is that forever is not actually about time at all, but about depth. Having had unlimited time to explore every aspect of existence, you discover that the richness of experience is not measured by its duration, but by its intensity, meaning, and connection to the deeper patterns that govern all of life. A single moment of perfect understanding or complete love contains more reality than centuries of superficial experience. Forever, you realize, is not about having more time, but about having enough time to discover what time itself really means. Your relationship with mortality takes on an entirely new dimension during this final century of your first millennium. Having watched countless shorter-lived beings complete their entire life cycles while you continued on, you develop a profound appreciation for the unique gifts that come with finite existence. You see how the awareness of limited time can create urgency that drives accomplishment, intensity that deepens experience, and preciousness that makes every moment valuable. Yet you also understand how unlimited time allows for patience that enables wisdom, perspective that transcends immediate concerns, and the opportunity to see patterns and purposes that are invisible within shorter lifespans. The paradox of forever begins to resolve itself as you realize that infinite time and finite experience are both necessary for complete understanding of existence. Your extended life has allowed you to explore the depths of what is possible within the framework of individual consciousness, while your observation of countless other lives has shown you the beauty and necessity of completion, transformation, and renewal. You understand that your own extended existence serves not just your individual development, but the larger evolution of consciousness itself. Love, having been explored and expressed in countless forms across your 10 centuries, reveals its true nature as the fundamental force that connects all existence. You have loved people who lived their entire lives and died while you continued on. You have loved landscapes that transformed beyond recognition. You have loved ideas that were eventually superseded by new understanding. And through all of this loving and losing and loving again, you have discovered that love itself is the only thing that truly transcends time. Forever you realize, is not about having the people and things you love remain unchanged, but about developing a capacity for love that can embrace all change while remaining itself unchanged. The question of purpose, which has evolved continuously throughout your extended existence, finally resolves into something both simple and profound. Having had unlimited time to pursue every possible goal and accomplish every conceivable achievement, you discover that the ultimate purpose of existence is existence itself, the pure fact of consciousness experiencing and appreciating the miracle of being. Every other purpose, no matter how noble or meaningful, eventually reveals itself as a variation on this fundamental theme of consciousness celebrating its own existence through experience, relationship, and understanding. Your understanding of identity undergoes its final transformation during this concluding century of your first millennium. Having been countless different versions of yourself across the centuries, having played every possible role and explored every facet of human potential, you finally understand that identity is not something you have, but something you are in the process of becoming. The self that began this thousand-year journey no longer exists. Yet something essential has been preserved and refined through every transformation. This something, call it consciousness, soul, or essential being, reveals itself to be both completely individual and utterly universal. The wisdom you have accumulated across 10 centuries of experience crystallizes into understanding that can barely be expressed in words. You know in your bones how happiness and suffering both arise and pass away, how love and loss dance together in eternal partnership, how creation and destruction serve the same ultimate purpose of renewal and growth. You understand how individual consciousness relates to universal consciousness, how time relates to eternity, how form relates to formlessness, and how being relates to becoming. Memory, that vast library of experiences accumulated across a millennium, transforms into something more like wisdom itself. Instead of being burdened by countless memories, you find that your experiences have been distilled into pure understanding that informs every moment without overwhelming it. You carry within you the essence of 1,000 years of living, not as a collection of facts or events, but as a quality of awareness that has been refined through countless encounters with the full spectrum of what existence has to offer. Your relationship with the future takes on an interesting quality during this final century of your first millennium. Having learned that predictions are less important than adaptability, that plans are less valuable than presence, and that expectations often limit the wonderful surprises that life provides, you approach the possibility of another millennium not with anxiety about what might happen, but with curiosity about what will be discovered. The future becomes not a problem to be solved, but an adventure to be experienced. The planet Earth, which has been your home and teacher throughout this extended journey, is revealed to be not just a physical location, but a consciousness in its own right, with its own purposes and patterns that operate on timescales that make even your millennium seem brief. You understand your role not as a separate being living on the planet, but as one expression of the planet's own evolving consciousness, exploring itself through the experiences of all the beings it nurtures and sustains. Gratitude becomes the dominant emotion of this final century. Not sentimental appreciation, but profound recognition of the extraordinary privilege of having been given the opportunity to explore existence so thoroughly. You are grateful for every joy and every sorrow, every success and every failure, every connection and every loss, understanding that each experience has contributed something essential to your development. This gratitude extends beyond your personal experiences to appreciation for the entire evolutionary process that made consciousness possible in the first place. The question of whether you would choose to continue for another millennium becomes not a burden, but a fascinating exploration. Having discovered that existence itself is infinitely rich and endlessly surprising, you understand that the choice is not really about whether to continue, but about how to continue growing and contributing. Each additional century offers new possibilities for understanding, new opportunities for service, new depths of experience to explore. Peace becomes your natural state during this final century. Not the peace of completion, but the peace of alignment with the fundamental rhythms of existence. You understand your place in the larger pattern, you accept your role in the ongoing evolution of consciousness, and you embrace both your individual uniqueness and your universal connection. This peace is not passive, but dynamically engaged with life, participating fully while remaining centered in the understanding that has taken a millennium to develop. The gift of forever finally reveals its true nature. It is not the gift of endless time, but the gift of perspective that allows you to see the timeless within time, the eternal within the temporal, the infinite within the finite. Having had a millennium to explore existence, you discover that forever was always present in every moment. You simply needed enough time to learn how to see it. As you rest in this final reflection on your extraordinary journey, whether you are approaching the end of your own extended adventure or settling into sleep to dream of such possibilities, know that the gift of forever is not really about living 1,000 years. It is about living each moment with the depth of awareness that 1,000 years of experience makes possible. It is about loving with the fullness that comes from understanding love's essential nature. It is about appreciating the present with the perspective that can only come from having witnessed the vast patterns that govern all existence. The gift of forever is ultimately the gift of understanding that you are both a temporary expression of eternal consciousness and an eternal expression of temporary form. In discovering this paradox, you find that immortality is not about lasting forever, but about touching that which does last forever. The consciousness that experiences, the love that connects, and the awareness that appreciates the miracle of existence itself. Rest well in this understanding, dear dreamer. Whether your journey lasts a single lifetime or extends across millennia, you are participating in the same fundamental adventure of consciousness exploring itself through the beautiful, temporary, eternal miracle of being alive. In this exploration, every moment is both fleeting and forever. Every experience is both individual and universal, and every dream is both personal and cosmic. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you are held within the infinite embrace of existence itself, forever safe, forever loved, forever home.